Hello, it's Captain. Welcome back to Stormworks Basics Tutorial. So this is going to be a little tutorial series on cooling. A lot of people have been having some issues and questions about cooling post-pressurization update. I put out a video or a couple of videos on cooling before the pressurization update. We actually have a little bit of an easier time doing cooling now after the pressurization update. Before the pressurization update, we were limited to 75 liters for the liquid flow rate. We're now able to go much higher than that. Generally speaking, of course, a lot of this is generally speaking, the higher the flow rate you get on your liquid in your cooling system, the better your cooling is going to be. It's a little bit more complicated than that. It is not overly simplified. It is more realistic. So, for example, if your engine has a higher RPS, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to overheat faster than if it has more load. That's how it would be IRL. So we're going to go through a bunch of this in this series. This will be kind of the first basic introduction to this setup. You'll see the rig working. You'll see some of the times. You'll see some different setups. So let's go ahead and we'll go through part one here. All right, so I have a bunch of engines. These are all the exact same identical two-cylinder modular engines. They have the exact same ECU. My Stormworks Basics modular engine tutorial setup here running them. So we'll quickly go over each engine. So this one here is going to be my control. Always important in scientific testing to have a control. So this one has no cooling whatsoever. This is just ambient cooling. If we look at the engines here, we have an alternator that is going to be some sort of load on there. We have two cylinders. We have a gearbox and we have a generator. This is the load. You'll see a lot of people, they'll do testing for cooling in game, and they will not put any load in your engine. There is a relationship between RPS and load. For example, you can run your engine at a very high RPS if the load is very, very low, and you will not overheat, or it'll take a long time to overheat. You can also run your engine at a very, very low RPS, but a very high load, and overheat. So there's a relationship between the amount of load in the engine, the amount of work the engine is doing, and the RPS. So, like, you'll see a lot of people, they'll be like, oh, you're overheating, decrease your RPS. And the reason they say that is because your load is static. So say, for example, you're turning one medium propeller. If you can get the RPS down, you're still turning one medium propeller. If you went to a larger propeller, you would be increasing the amount of load, the resistance on the engine. That will cause more heat. So you might need to run at an even lower RPS with more load on there. So we'll go through all that through the series, but let's go through each example here, and then we will go ahead and we'll run them and see how long it takes them to overheat. So this first one here, again, this is the control. This one has no cooling whatsoever. All right. The next one here, we have two small fluid pumps. Right here. I'm trying to keep the piping as short as possible. Generally speaking, with cooling, the more pipes you have, it is going to decrease your flow rates. So ideally, you want to have as few pipes and as short of a loop as possible. A loop being from the cooling apparatus, in this case a radiator, all the way through and back. That is a loop. All right. So the shorter your loop, generally speaking, the better. So as you can see here, I'm using these manifold pieces to get the coolant manifold closer. That is generally the best practice. So this one here is the exact same motor, but with those pumps and the standard old school radiator. Here is two large fluid pumps. All right, from there we have a small impeller with an electric motor. Now, the electric motor requires electrical production. So one could argue that if we're going to turn an electric motor to turn the impeller, right, we're going to need to produce more electricity to do that. This is set incredibly low. Let me see if I can see the number on here. The constant number is 0.185. So that electric motor, in order for me to get maximum flow rate, is only at 0.185. It is very, very low. We'll go over a video in this series showing the different flow rates and how you don't need to, for example, bring your motor all the way up to 1. You do not need very high RPS in these impellers to reach the maximum flow rates. So this one here has that one impeller with an electric motor set to 0.185. This one here is a large impeller. Now, there are very few use cases I would use a large impeller for. The large impeller pump also requires a lot of power from your engine to be able to run. So as you can see here, we have the clutch coming out. We have an RPS connection. That RPS connection is then turning the large impeller. That's what's turning the large impeller. This requires a lot of power to turn the impeller. And because of that, it is stealing energy away from our engine, and I'll show you what happens with that. Next one over here is going to be a small impeller run by the RPS off of the drive shaft here. So we have, again, RPS coming off to drive the small impeller. So this one here is pretty similar to that one. The only difference is this one is taking the engine's power. All right, and these are all duplicated again. The difference in this one here, this is the control, and then we have a fluid tank. So all we're doing here is we're T-piecing, and we're adding a fluid tank. This is adding more liquid, more water into the system. As you can see, it comes pre-pressurized at 22 atmospheres. There's 11 liters of fresh water in there, all right, and a little bit of gas. This is all I did was put a tank on there, teed out. That's it, all right. As you can see, they're all the same, just with that little tank, all right. Now, I have found this one over here not to be great. Again, here's a control. This is something some people have suggested. I'm not getting very good results with this. We'll go over it. But this is just using a gas tank. So, generally speaking, the higher your liquid flow rate, in this case, water, for cooling, the better. By injecting some gas in here, I'm not getting great results. We'll go through it all. All right, so we have all the examples, the 6 examples back here, just with that. All right, so I also have a button up here. This is going to change the gear ratio. We'll talk about that in a separate part of this series. You can have a small load and a high RPS. You can have a low RPS and a high load. At some point, if the load and the RPS are too excessive, you will overheat. All right, so let's go ahead and start them up. All right, so I'll quickly lower the volume down. So the other thing to notice here is this is my timer. As you notice, the timer has started. As soon as I start the system up, it's going to start the timer. It's going to count 1 click per second. And when it hits 110 degrees, where my overheat protection system kicks in, it will then stop the timer. So there's going to be a timer up to 110. At 115, the engine will catch on fire. Now, if you follow the modular engine tutorial series, which I suggest you do, you'll notice how I put on a overheat protection system. That protects the engine from ever catching on fire and getting damaged. And what it does is essentially puts you into limp mode. It's really simple. All it does is it turns the pit off when you go over 110. As soon as you shut the engine off, it will drop below 110. The engine will come back on. So it goes on, off, on, off, on, off with your engine. You'll still have a little bit of power. You could limp to where you need to go, but that is an overheat protection system. That is on there. That's why at 110, this will automatically stop the timer. All right, good. So let's kick on the rest of these here. We'll turn them. All right, now we will talk about one of these examples in a second here. Let's get them all on first. All right, so I have that button up front. That will change the gear ratio. We'll do that later. We're not going to do it right now. I will show you the gear ratios in a second. I can't remember them off the top of my head. All right, I have to walk around this one because of that silly gas tank. All right, good. So they're all started up. Now, the control, again, has no cooling. This one here is the same as this one here, is the same as this one here. They're all the control. These are all identical. All right. And then the independent ones are all based off of that and have minor changes. This set here, again, is all just cooling loops. This one here is all cooling loops with the small tank. These are all cooling loops with this gas cylinder. All right. Because of having the timer on here, it doesn't matter when I start these. The timer will keep clicking until they overheat. All right. This one here is the one I want to talk about. Like I was saying, I find very few use cases for the large impeller for cooling. Now, you might find a use case in a 5x5 if you're trying to pull liquid from long distances. But what you'll notice here is, let's look at the starter on this example. The starter here is going to see it just kicked on. And the reason is simple. The way the system works is it will clutch in. So let's watch the clutch. As you can see, when it increases the clutch to not even 1, when it gets up around 70%, that is too much load on this engine. This is only a 2-cylinder motor. So what's going to happen with this is once it gets up there, it says, oh my God, I'm going to stall. And it reduces the clutch. It actually does stall. It kicks the starter off. So especially for a small 2-cylinder engine, something you might put in a small car, as you can see, this is ridiculously large. There is no real reason to use the large impeller. That is why this part of the example here keeps running the starter. This is too much load. This is stealing too much power from the engine, and the engine cannot sustain itself. All right. So let's look at some of the factors here. This one here, as you can see, is way low. Why? This one is overheated. As you can see, 110 degrees. It is now in overheat protection mode. It is in limp mode. So this one here with no cooling took 220 seconds to overheat. So we'll just go ahead and shut it off. Next one over here, as you can see, is still at 71 degrees, still going. So let's look at some of the numbers. Each of these in this first example are running at 21 RPS. This one was running at 21 RPS. As you can see, 21 RPS on this one, and change. I'll show you the decimal places. 21.19. If we look at the generator here, we can tell if that's 21, we have 42. That means this is a 2-to-1 gear ratio. As you see, we're producing 11.5 S-watts. So let's look at the pump. Now, this one here, I'm not sure what exactly is going on. As you can see, we have some really big fluctuations with these small pumps on this particular example. For some reason, this example is not running all that great, but it is still cooling. So I think this may just be some sort of game issue because this one is cooling reasonably, even though we're getting fluctuations. Generally speaking, if you're getting this oscillation, this fluctuation here with flow rate, I would consider you're not getting very good cooling. So ideally what you want is stable flow rates. And the next example and the rest of the examples will demonstrate that. So let's go to the next example. All right, 21 RPS, making about the same amount of S-watts. We're at 83 degrees. Again, to compare it to this one, we're at 82. As you can see here on the pumps, this is what stable flow rates look like. As you can see, they're not oscillating. We're getting 181, 181, no movement. This is ideally what you want. Now, I do not know why this one is oscillating and still working fine, because if this was doing no cooling, we could expect this would have already overheated. It has not. So this one is working. I would tend to say, try not to go with oscillation. It's not the end of the world if it's oscillating. You have to test it. Generally speaking, especially before the pressurization update, if it was oscillating like this, we would assume that it was not cooling at all. But as you can see, this one already overheated quite a while ago. It overheated about 83 seconds ago. And this one here is still cooling. So I don't know why this one's oscillating, but it is. All right, over here, this one is steady as a rock. Now, you'll hear a lot of people poo-poo the pressurization update. I've done a ton of cool things with the pressurization update. I don't think the changes you have to make to your build are all that challenging. They're usually pretty simple. Just like this here, this is how you vent your tanks. 2 parts, ventilate your tanks, real simple. One of the great benefits of the pressurization update was we used to only be able to get 75 liters in, 75 liters out before the pressurization update. After the pressurization update, as you can see, here we are at 181, 181. We're able to get much higher flow rates because of the pressurization update. So cooling now is actually better than it was before, right? So let's look at this next example here. This is the one I was talking about, the electric motor. Now, this electric motor here is a very low setting. It's at 0.185. This is giving me 123 liters per second, 123 liters per second, okay? You do not need very high RPS on your impellers to get maximum flow rate. If I went to a electric motor setting of 0.2, which is just a little bit higher, it would still give me 123, 123. If I went to an electric motor setting of 1, which is the maximum electric motor setting, it would still be giving me 123, 123. All you're doing is wasting electricity. So what I would recommend you do is put a throttle on there and keep increasing the number to the electric motor until you no longer get an increase in liters per second, and then make that your setting for the impeller. So as you can see, let's look at something real quick on this example here. Because we are using an electric motor for this impeller, we are not robbing or stealing any of the power from our engine. We're not taking any of the power off. So power takeoff, PTO, we're not taking any power from the drive shaft to run the impeller. And because of that, as you can see, we're at 21 RPS, just like the other examples. We're still making 11.49 on the generator. This example here is very much like that one over there. But instead of the electric motor, again, we're using the RPS connection off of the drive shaft. All right, as you can see, it is turning this at 20. We're stealing a lot of power from our engine. Now, what could we do? If we look over here, And we see that this one here is only turning at, let me see, I think it's 6 point something, 6.69 giggity RPS to get maximum flow rate of 123 on that particular setup. As you can see here, we're at 123 and we're at 20 RPS. So one thing I could do is I could take a gearbox and I could face it away from the engine, so facing to the right here, and I could down gear this. I could reduce this. So now we're at 20. What I would do is a 3 to 1. That would be 1/3 of 20. That would be 6.6666 repeating, and so that would get us maximum flow rate with stealing much less power from the engine. So personally, you could do that. Now, this is how I used to do a lot of my systems. This is actually a really good way to do it for small cars. After doing all this testing, I'm actually changing up some of my methods. This is how I used to do most of my cooling post-pressurization update. I would take an RPS connection and I would plug it into the impeller. Now, generally what I would do for, say, a car, I would run it through the transmission, and then I would come up from the front axle and I would run the impeller. That is already down gearing it. It would steal a minimal amount of power from the engine. Whenever the car is in motion, it would then run the impeller. It was really great at cooling. My new favorite is this one over here. I think this is the way to go. Again, this is nice and super compact. As you can see, we have one impeller and one block behind it for the electric motor. It takes a very little amount of electricity because we're only at a 0.185. This, as you can see, is using a lot of piping. So for a small build, this will actually take up a bunch of space. That's something you need to consider with these as well, is how much space it takes up. All right, so let's look at this here. So this one here is at 20. Why is this one at 20 and this one is at 21? Well, just what I said. It's stealing power from the engine. Because this is stealing power from the engine, it is putting load onto the engine. All right, now again, we have a relationship between RPS and load. So the RPS is lower, right? But the load is higher. So as you can see, this one literally just right now overheated at 649 seconds. If we look over here, this one is still going. Why is this one still going when this one is actually running or was running at a lower RPS? This one was running at 20 RPS. This one was running at 21 RPS. A lot of people say that doesn't make any sense. The RPS is lower. It should have overheated later. No, 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 no. The load was higher. The RPS was lower, but the load was higher. This one, the only load this one has is a pipe connection here going through a gearbox to the generator. This one is a pipe connection to an impeller for our air to supercharge. It does not have a connection for this other impeller. This one here is powering two impellers and the generator. It's powering the generator, this impeller, and this impeller. This one had an increased load. So overheating in game is a combination of how much load you have on the engine and how much RPS. The higher the load, the lower the RPS you can run it at before it overheats. So you can use these in your builds. As if your build is overheating, you have to consider decreasing the load if you can, and decreasing the RPS. You know, you can keep the RPS high, but you can run a small load. You cannot run a large load at a high RPS. So you have that option. You can either drop your RPS, drop the load, or a combination of both. So for example, let's say I want to drop the RPS. One thing I could do is add a cylinder. By adding a cylinder, I'm increasing my strength of the engine, and I can run at a lower RPS. So if I went to a 3-cylinder, I could run at a lower RPS, and I could make the same power, and I could run the same systems because the load would stay the same, but the RPS would be able to go down. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. All right, so let's look at some of these examples really quick again. This one, 220 seconds. This one, 782 seconds, and still going. As you can see, we're at 98 degrees. This one over here is at 102 degrees. As you can see, still going, 789. This one here is still going. This one here we shut off. This one here overheated at 649. All right. This one here is our control. As you can see, the control hit 110. Took 219 seconds. All right. So this one here and this one here are the same. Exactly the same. We can shut that one off. All right. Now let's look at this example here. So this one here is at 87 degrees. 807. Let's look at this one here. 99 degrees at 822. So this one's only been running for 10 seconds longer, but it is much hotter. What this is doing is, let's look at the flow rates. This one here is going to be tough. We can't read this, but we'll extrapolate from the other examples what's going on here. But what we're essentially doing is we're adding more liquid. By adding more liquid, you should be able to increase the amount of liters per second you're getting. And generally speaking, again, the more water liters per second you're getting in general, the better your cooling is going to be. So we're adding extra water. Now, T-piecing this like this off the side is the best way to do it. If you put it in series, like you did pipe in one side, pipe out the other side, you get some turbulent flow in here. So you could get some liquid getting stuck in here, which could cause resistance and actually slow the system down. So they found that this system works best. Essentially what's happening is the liquid is just going in its loop and it's grabbing the extra liquid through here because this is pre-pressurized. Can't really see with this example, so let's go over here and let's look at the large pumps. So if we look at the large pump, we can see we're doing 181, 181. All right, let's look at this one here. This one has that tank on it again, remember. 220, 220, right? Makes sense. What we've done is we've increased the amount of water in the system, and it has increased the flow rate, the water flow rate. In general, again, increasing the water flow rate increases cooling. So let's look at the temps on this. 86 for 916, 102 for 929. So 15 seconds this one has been running, and this one is considerably lower. So yes, this one has been running for a shorter period of time, but as you can see, it is cooler. So let's go to this one here. This one, actually, let's see where we're at here. All right, so let's go to this one here. This one is the electric motor. Again, this one is the impeller with the electric motor. Let's look at flow rates on this one. 130, 130. Let's look at this one. 123, 123. So by adding that tank, again, we're putting more liquid in the system. That will help us with cooling. So this one here is 966 at 96 degrees. This one is 85 degrees for 962. So as you can see, we're getting better cooling with this little tank on there. All right, this is the large impeller. Again, the engine is not strong enough to run that, so we'll shut it off. All right, here is the impeller with the RPS connection. Let's look at this. Again, if you notice that this one's at 20 RPS. This one is at 21 RPS. Again, because we're stealing some of the power here, we're putting more resistance on this motor. And because we're putting more resistance on the motor, right, we are decreasing the RPS, right? We're stealing some of that RPS to go up to that impeller. That's going to also cause us to make less power. 10.31. 11.34, so as you can see, we're making more S-watts because we're not stealing that power away, okay? This one here is at 94 degrees. This one here is at 85 degrees. So as you can see, using this electric motor is better than increasing your load. By increasing the load, again, add too much load, you're going to increase your temperature, all right? The RPS is lower, but again, we're increasing their load, and there's that relationship between RPS and load. We've increased our load, we're increasing our temperature in this case. Here's the control again. As you can see, control is overheated, same amount of time. So 219, 219, 220. These have all pretty much overheated all in the same amount of time, the three controls. All right, now this one here is with the gas. Now, people used to say the higher your flow rate, the better your cooling. True. Again, the higher your water flow rate, the better the cooling. Now, that does not work with gas. Now, IRL and appears in-game like it should. Gases tend to be insulators. They insulate heat. They do not conduct it from one place to the other very well. The whole point of having a radiator is to conduct heat. Liquids are good conductors. Solids are even better conductors. Heat is essentially vibration. So the closer the molecules are together, the better they are at transferring the vibration from one molecule to the next to the next. Gases tend to be considered insulators, right? You would use a gas to not transfer heat. That is actually the purpose of an insulator, is to not transfer heat. And what we're trying to do here is transfer heat. So you do not want to be putting a bunch of gas into your cooling loop. It is not going to do a good job at transferring heat. This one overheated in 962 seconds. Let's look at its example over here. So here we go. This one, it is Still going. This one is still not overheated. At 962 seconds, this one here, which is the same as the one we just walked up to, this one is already overheated because we've injected gas in there. Now, we really can't see because we're getting the oscillation on these small pumps. So let's look at this one. Again, these are the large fluid pumps injecting gas. Oh my God, that looks fantastic, right? 3,388 liters per second. But it's gas. Gas, again, is an insulator. It's not a conductor. We want a conductor going through our system in order to conduct the heat from the engine to the radiator so that the radiator can dissipate the heat by radiation. That's the whole point. So we do not want to be injecting air. Now, some people said this works for them. I would love to see how they're doing it. I would personally not want to use it because, again, it kind of breaks my brain. It's not realistic to have an insulator that helps you cool. You want a conductor in there. So something like water is a good conductor for cooling. You'll often see that in car radiators. Oil is a good conductor for cooling. You'll see that in, for example, a lot of electrical applications like electrical transformers. And then you actually have just plate conductors as well. All right, so as we can see with this one looks like it has fantastic flow rates, but it is fake. It's a bunch of gas. The gas is going through there. That is not going to help us. And if we go ahead and we look at this, it is not overheated yet, but as we can see, it's at 107 degrees, so it's getting there. And if we look at our first example here, we're at 103, and it's been running for longer. If we look at this one here, it is at 86 degrees. So this one here is not helping. So none of these gas ones, spoiler alert, are going to help. And here we have the electric impeller. As you can see, wow, look at that, 1,910. But it's nonsense. It's all gas. It is not helping us. As you can see, temperature is 105, still going. But if we look at this example here, we're at 85. So I would say do not inject gas in there. It does not make sense in real life, and it does not make sense in game to be injecting gas in there. Some people have been saying to do that. If you have a setup that works, I'd love to see it. But again, I would personally not use it because it's not realistic. Again, here's the large impeller. That's just our engine's not strong enough for that, so we'll shut that off. And here is the one with the RPS connection. Again, with this gas cylinder. So as you can see, this one is already overheated. This one is overheated at 431 seconds. We're overheated on this one. So again, even though the RPS is lower on this one, it makes sense why it's overheating because we're putting more load on the engine. So you do have to consider that as you put more load in the engine, you need to run at a lower RPS. For example, we could run I'll show you in future videos. I will go through, and what we'll do is we'll actually change the gear ratio on these gearboxes, and you will see that the amount of time it takes to overheat changes. Some of these engines that have already overheated will not overheat if we decrease the gear ratio because we are decreasing load. They're running at the same RPS at a decreased load, and they will not overheat. We can actually run them at higher RPSs at a decreased load, and they will not overheat. All right, so before we end, let's go ahead and go over some of these numbers. So we have our first model here. This is our control. No cooling on this. As you can see, 220. The next one here is the two small fluid pumps. This one has been going for 3,127 seconds. As you can see, it is stabilized at 99C. This will not overheat at 21 RPS with a 2-to-1 gearbox and a small generator on it. This one here is two large pumps, 21 RPS. As you can see, it's at 103 degrees, will not overheat, approximately the same amount of time. Here we go. We have my favorite, which is the small impeller powered by a small electric motor. As you can see, 97 degrees. So we have 99, 103, 97. This is one of the reasons this is my favorite. Used a very small amount of electricity. It is incredibly small, 2 blocks. As you can see, the whole loop is much, much smaller. This is very, very compact. That's why this is my favorite. 21 RPS, still going there, 97 degrees. As we said before, the large impellers we're not even going to bother with because this particular motor is not strong enough to run the large impeller, so we're not going to worry about that. This one here, again, this is using the RPS connection to run the impeller. That is adding extra load on the engine. So not only are we at a lower RPS, generally around 20, we're also making fewer S-watts, so we have less power going to the wheels, the tank tracks, the propeller, the generator in this case. This one overheated in 655 seconds. because of the increased load. As I was saying before, you don't just have to worry about RPS, you have to worry about the relationship between RPS and load. Here's our other control. So our control is at 220, as you can see, 220, 220, and our last control is also about 220. So they're consistent in their cooling. They're consistent in their heating rate with no cooling. Here we are adding the small fluid tank. So the small fluid tank here is increasing the fluid, therefore helping us to cool better. We're at 87 degrees. As you can see, we have not overheated. We'll go up and look at this one. This one here is at 99 degrees. So neither of those will overheat with this setup, but this one is running cooler with that additional fluid tank full of water, of course. Large fluid pumps here, as you can see, same stats on the RPS. We are pushing more fluid through, and therefore, as you can see, the temperature is 86 degrees. Temperature up on this one without that tank, 103. So much cooler because we're able to push more liters per second, as you can see. All right, going from there, we'll go to the small impeller with the electric motor. Again, my favorite. As you can see, we do have the tank on there. We're at 85 degrees, still going, has not overheated, of course. This one here is at 97. So yes, that tank is helping us quite a bit. Not going to worry about the large impeller, as stated. This one here with the RPS node on it, as you can see, is still going. So the tank with this particular setup has allowed us to keep going on this one. The one before here, as you can see, has overheated. With the tank, it is maintaining 94 degrees, so still a good option if you want to use drive off of the power takeoff. You either have to decrease your load, decrease the RPS, or the tank. We will be going over different load settings in future videos. Control, again, 220. With the air on there, as stated, a gas is an insulator, not a conductor. It is not helpful. Even though we're pushing huge quantities of air through here, that is not helping with cooling. It is hurting with cooling. We're at 850 seconds. This overheated. Here we go, large pumps. This one is still going, as you can see. So we're at 107. This one up here is at 86, and then this one here is at 103. So as you can see, it is certainly not helping us because with the example all the way up front that did not have the gas tank, it is actually cooler. So the gas tank, as far as I'm concerned, is a big old fail on these. As you can see with this one here, 105. This one is still going here, but again, you need to compare it to your to the other ones. With the small impeller, this one here again, 105. Small impeller here is at 85, and small impeller here is at 97. So there's really no point in running that gas tank. We'll go to the very last example here, and as you can see, 435 seconds, this one overheated. So those are the results for a 2-to-1 gearbox. This series is going to continue. We're going to go through some different things. We're going to talk about the relationship of load to RPS. Some other methods you can do with cooling. Now, as you notice, I have all these stock standard fluid heat radiators. If you put one of the electric radiators on there, you're going to get more cooling. So in certain circumstances, for example, some of these that overheated may not overheat. For example, this one probably wouldn't overheat if we put on electric radiator. That's another test. If you do set your systems up to work with, for example, this radiator, knowing that if you put a 3x3 electric radiator on there, likely you're going to be able to cool better than with this situation. So we will go through all this in a series. So I hope you guys are interested in the series. I hope this is helpful, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.